My project is the environmental effects of herbicides on the respiratory rate of Ectalis punctatus and the growth of Cyanobacteria anabina. The purpose of my project was to determine the effects that herbicides would have on the herbicide stresses on anabina and the respiratory rate of catfish. The reason I chose this project is because I wanted to find out if a herbicidal runoff into a stream or a lake would cause a decrease into the anabina population, and would that affect the food chain, and if so, how? And I also wanted to know if the fish respiration could be an indicator of the water quality in an ecosystem. First of all, before I could do my testing, I had to get 9 different chemicals. These were Eradicane, Express, MCP ester, Rodeo, Roundup, Sunland, Toradon, Trefalon, and 2,4-D. With these 9 chemicals, I did my testing. For the first part of my project, I dealt with the fish respiration catfish. In order to do this, I first had to take a control counting of each fish that I was testing with at the time. So first of all, I took my control, took my control of the respiration, gill movements per minute, and then I added 1 drop of herbicide to that, and got another reading off of it. And then I took this and did this for a period of 5 drops for the chemicals for the container. Did this for 3 water levels: 300 milliliters, 400 milliliters, and 500 milliliters. Once I had done this, I was able to graph my results by figuring out the spread. In other words, the difference from the control, either above or below. So as you can see here for under Eradicane, that generally they all started out about the same as far as on drop 1 with difference, except for the fact that the first drop on the 300 milliliters had caused a big decrease to be a lot less than about 35 or minus. But the other ones tended to stay the same trend, even though that the 300 milliliters caused a steady increase in the respiration. Express had managed to start the same and pretty much end the same, with quite a jumps in between, especially with the 500 milliliters, because it jumped closer to the normal and then shot back up again. With MCP ester, you can see that they start out about the same again and ended up about the same. Here the only difference was the fact that there was no constant path. No 2 of the water levels stayed the same for some reason. Rodeo started out as being pretty close to the same, and ended pretty close to the same again, with the biggest peak being between drops 1 and 2, and then the changes being between drop 3 and 4. With Roundup, they start out exactly the same, and when it crossed to the drop 2, being the same also pretty much, with the biggest increase starting by drop 3, and the biggest decrease going with types 500 milliliters and 400 milliliters between drop 3 and drop 4. With Toradon, you can see how they had pretty much a straight line through for both of the chemicals, except for the 300 milliliters, which had a higher respiration on drop 3. The 400 milliliters had dropped below the control reading and had peaked up and managed to keep on at the same rate as the other chemicals. Also, the Trefalon had started out pretty much the same for the 500 milliliters and the 300 milliliters. The 400 milliliters was much higher than the other 2, which started out negative. Once I had my complete fish respiration testing done, I was able to rank them by total spread by adding each spread. And I ranked each water level. Once I had each water level ranked, I added those rankings and found out that MCP ester was the chemical that caused the least amount of damage on the fish, and that Sunland was the chemical that caused the most amount of change. For the second part of my project, I tested anabina. The reason I chose anabina is because it's commonly found in many lakes and streams in North Dakota. Once I had my anabina, I had to come up with a way to test these, and I set up 3 different tests. The first had 1 drop of herbicide into 10 milliliters concentrated algae and a total 250 milliliter solution of spring water and 10 milliliters concentrated algae. The second one had the 250 milliliters of concentrated algae with the algae and spring water mixture, with also 1 drop of herbicide in it. The third test had algae, spring water, concentrated algae, and 5 drops of herbicide. Once I had completed those samples, I counted them on odd successive days, on days 1, 3, and so on through days 15. Every day I had them in the climatarium for 20 hours when I wasn't counting. I also checked, in order to count the number of cells per this container, I had to use the hanging drop method as illustrated here. I also checked the pH as I was counting also. Once I had completed my testings for that, I also took some pictures along with it. You can see here how generally, as the times went on, the number of cells increased quite a bit, even visually, along with the numbers and the cell countings that I had found. After I had completed that, I also took several microscopic pictures. Here's about days 3 to 7 here. And you can see here that these are the actual filaments with several cells contained in each one. These things here are heterocysts. That's much easier to see on this diagram here. This is the type of anabina I used, long straight filaments. Here is cell division occurring right here with this heterocyst right here. The heterocyst is only involved in nitrogen fixation. After I had completed my countings, I then graphed them. As shown here, you can see how generally the biggest increase in my control was between day 7 and day 9. This increase was true for test 1 and test 3, although the test 1 pretty much was a steady level around 30, 35. Eradicating is pretty much a smooth general movement. None of them were drastically changed, pretty much at exactly the same all the way across. In test 2, here's the biggest changes in test 2 of Express. It had increased quite a bit between days 11 and 13, with test 1 and test 3 staying about the same. With MCP ester, generally all the same. Same with Rodeo, Roundup, Sonolan. The only thing that's different about Sonolan is they increased more than the other ones, which pretty much stayed the same. With Tordon, basically they all start out the same, pretty much the same numbers, but they all decreased on the 3rd day. By this time, the test 1 had dropped down to 1 cell per drop that I found, and that in test 2, or by day 5, it had increased a little bit, not much, but then increases started to pick up for test 2 and test 3, and generally they evened out after that. Treflon had started out good, decreased a little bit, and then increased and kept on. With 2,4-D, they again started out good, decreased almost 0, and then picked up again, with the test 3 pulling in last, and then pretty much ending up the same. After I had finished I had to rank these by first subtracting the starting on day 3 from the rest of the days. Shown here, you can see how the anabina ranked overall. With Roundup, had 2 of the worst chemical or most damage, 10 being the worst and 1 being the least effective as far as having the least damage. And Sonolan had the least amount for type 1, but it ranked 9th with test 3. And with the MCP ester caused the least amount of effect was test 2 and test 3. And Tordon caused the most amount of damage with test 3. After I had completed this, I was able to come up with my overall ranking for anabina. I found that Roundup caused the most amount of damage in the anabina as far as stunting the growth, and that MCP ester caused the least amount of damage. In addition to my testings, in the last weeks I have done more research and found that 3 of my herbicides have 2 different chemicals in them. The one is in Rodeo has glyphosate, and Roundup has glyphosate. Tordon has a chemical known as methyl yellow. Glyphosate is just a toxic irritant, and methyl yellow is a cancer suspect. Shown here in this graph with glyphosate over the same situation I had set up for both the anabina, both the tests on all my tests for the other anabina testing with herbicide. You can see here that they start out about the same, except for the biggest increases between the first increase is day 7, then it decreased on day 9, and on day 11 it had increased the most throughout the testing to up to 150 some cells. And with test 2 and test 3. Test 1 stayed pretty much the same with a gradual increase. With methyl yellow, Generally, they had the biggest increase with test 1 and test 3, which seemed to follow the same pattern and trend and increase at the same rate with each other. With test 3, they seemed to stay closer to test 1 than test 3 or test 2 did. I also took and graphed the comparison between rodeo and glyphosate, chemicals that were found in each other. On test 1, they stayed pretty much the same, no big changes. The control on test 2 had increased quite a bit more, but on day 11 it had increased a lot more than the rodeo did. Before that, the trends were the same. Same situation with test 3. Day 11 had the biggest increase, but then it leveled out after that again, the control being higher. In the average comparison, you can see here how the control had done about the same, a little better than the glyphosate did, but it was okay. Rodeo had leveled out quite a bit. With glyphosate and Roundup for test 1, you can see that they generally stayed the same also. With test 2, you can see here that glyphosate on day 11, it increased more with the same situation as in before in rodeo, except for this time Roundup had increased more by day 15. With test 3 comparison, you can see that day 11 again increased more, but then the Roundup had decreased quite a bit more through the early part of the testing. The glyphosate average average comparisons again, you can see that the control had ranked above it, with glyphosate slowly behind and decreasing and increasing more than the control, and the Roundup having a more gradual increase and never any sharp changes. With test 1 with methyl yellow and Tordon, you can see how they changed quite a bit as far as the trend staying the same, but there was peaks in the methyl yellow, but there wasn't any peaks, only one depression on day 3, but then it picked up again for test 1. With test 2, you can see here how control had quite a drastic increase there on day 7, but then on day after that, methyl yellow and Tordon had stayed the same, helping to enforce that. I think that the hypothesis that these chemicals, methyl yellow especially and Tordon, is chemical that caused the reaction in the Anabina. With test 3 comparisons, you can see again how on day 9 the control had increased quite a bit more, and that the trends stayed pretty much the same with Tordon and methyl yellow. With the average comparisons with methyl yellow and Tordon, you can see how on day 9 they all increased quite a bit more, but it started on day 5, working up through day 9, and generally the trends there were again the same, helping to enforce that same theory beforehand. After I had completed all my testing, I was able to come up with my overall rankings. In the Anabina rankings, again, the Roundup was the chemical that caused the most amount of damage. In catfish, it was sunline that caused the most amount of damage. In the Anabina, again, the MCPS was the chemical that caused the least amount of damage, and catfish was the chemical, or sunline was the chemical that caused the most or least amount of damage. MCPS there again had that for catfish also. Overall, 2,4-D was the chemical that caused the most amount of effect, and the MCPS was the chemical that caused the least amount of effect. Through all my research and data I've accumulated in the past weeks, I found that if there is runoff in the streams, it will decrease the cell population of algae in an ecosystem, and this will cause a change in the food chain, starting with the small organisms such as fish working their way up to higher organisms and predators. And also, I found that fish respiration is definitely a way to find out the quality of water in the ecosystem. Here's a journal article I have found that helps to reinforce that theory, because there's a method called fish cough response, which is a method to test the water quality in the ecosystem. Any questions?